So, have you ever really stopped to think about what a perfect society would look like? I mean, it's a question philosophers have been wrestling with for, well, thousands of years. You've got guys like Plato, who came up with these incredible radical blueprints for utopia. But then you have his student, Aristotle, who took a totally different path. He was all about giving those dreamy theories a hard dose of reality. So today, let's dive right into what is basically a masterclass in political reality.
Yeah, this is the big question, right? What's the goal? Is it a world of total equality? Or maybe absolute unity, complete freedom? You know, the thinkers back in ancient Greece were absolutely obsessed with this stuff. And honestly, their debates pretty much laid the foundation for how we still talk about politics today.
Okay, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to walk through Aristotle's thinking step by step. First, we'll look at this whole quest for utopia. Then, we'll get into his takedown of the illusion of unity. After that, we'll tackle the big debate, common versus private property. We'll see what he learned from looking at actual flawed states. And finally, we'll get to his verdict on the whole idea of perfection. Right, so first things first, Aristotle wasn't some philosopher sitting in an ivory tower. No way. His goal was super practical: to figure out the best possible way for actual real human beings to live together in community. And to do that, he knew he couldn't just theorize. He had to study everything. Not just the governments that were already out there, but also all those famous perfect state models to sift through what was good, what was maybe useful, and what was, well, just pure fantasy. And probably the most famous of those fantasies came from Socrates, at least as Plato describes it in his book, The Republic. And his idea was, wow, it was radical. To get to this state of perfect harmony, he proposed that the ruling class, the guardians, should share everything. And I don't just mean property. I mean wives and children too. The whole point was to make the state feel like one big, single, unified family. Okay, and it's right here that Aristotle just slams on the brakes. He hears this idea and says, whoa, hold on a second. He takes that core assumption, the idea that more unity is always automatically a good thing, and he attacks it at its very foundation. It's fascinating, so let's see exactly how he builds his case against it.
So yeah, this is the central idea that Aristotle is determined to just completely dismantle. He's basically arguing that Socrates' logic, as nice as it might sound on the surface, is just fundamentally flawed. And following it wouldn't lead to a stronger state. He thought it would lead to its total and complete destruction.
And right here, this is the heart of their disagreement. It's a total clash of worldviews. Socrates is pushing for a state that's so unified, it's almost like a single person, a single organism. But Aristotle fires right back and says, you're missing the entire point of what a state even is. For him, a state isn't made up of identical parts. Its very nature, its strength, comes from its plurality, from being a mix of different kinds of people with different roles. If you erase that diversity, you're not strengthening the state. You're literally destroying the very thing that makes it a state.
Aristotle's objections here are just so practical. It's almost brutal. He argues that if you make everyone family, you don't actually strengthen family bonds. You just water them down until the word family becomes meaningless. And worse, he predicted this would lead to massive neglect. Why? Because when something is everyone's responsibility, it ends up being no one's responsibility. And then there's the really chilling part. He points out that you'd get this huge risk of terrible crimes happening between relatives who have no idea they're even related. It's a pretty dark prediction.
And this quote just nails the psychological point he's making. That which is common to the greatest number has the least care bestowed upon it. It's so true, isn't it? If everyone is responsible, then nobody feels personally responsible. Think about it. If 1,000 kids belong to 1,000 adults, what happens? They'll probably be neglected, because every single person just assumes someone else is taking care of it. It's just a timeless and kind of depressing insight into human nature.
So it makes perfect sense that this exact same logic, this idea of diluted responsibility, applies directly to property too. I mean, if making families common is such a terrible idea, then what about making all the property, all the land and goods, common as well?
And being Aristotle, he doesn't just dismiss it, he thinks about it systematically. He lays out the options. Okay, how could this work? System 1, maybe everyone has their own private lot of land, but the stuff you grow all goes into a common store. Or System 2, the land itself is common, but everyone gets to keep their own private share of the harvest. Or System 3, you go all in, fully communal, where both the land and the harvest are shared by everybody.
But in the end, he actually rejects all of those setups. Instead, he proposes a much more nuanced solution. He says the best system, the one that actually works with human nature,
is private ownership with common use. So you own your own stuff. That gives you the incentive to take care of it, to improve it. But, and this is a big but, through good laws, through strong customs, and by teaching people to be virtuous, you encourage everyone to share the use of their private property with their friends and with the whole community.
But see, for Aristotle, this isn't just about what's efficient or what's productive. Not at all. He argues that getting rid of private property entirely, going full communism, creates a huge moral problem. It actually makes it impossible for people to practice two absolutely essential human virtues.
And the logic here is really straightforward. First, generosity. How can you be generous if you don't actually own anything to give away? You can't. And what about self-control or temperance? The moral act of respecting someone else's property, or someone else's spouse for that matter, just vanishes if nothing is actually private. So for Aristotle, it's a bombshell of an idea. True virtue, in some ways, actually requires private ownership to even exist.
And this is really his killer counter-argument. See, thinkers like Plato and Socrates, they looked at the world and saw private property as the root of all evil, the cause of lawsuits, greed, jealousy. But Aristotle says, nope, you've mistaken the symptom for the disease. The real cause of all that conflict isn't property. It's just human wickedness. It's a flaw in our nature. And that flaw isn't just going to magically disappear if you get rid of private property. In fact, he kind of cheekily points out that if you've ever had roommates, you know that people who have to share things in common often end up fighting more than people who own their own stuff. So, after completely taking apart the theory behind these utopian ideas, Aristotle does what he does best. He turns his focus to the real world. He starts looking at the actual laws and constitutions of real places, like the famous states of Sparta and Crete, to see what lessons we can learn from them. And this quote is basically the motto for his entire philosophy. We must not disregard the experience of ages. I mean, his argument is pure common sense. If these radical utopian ideas were really so great, wouldn't someone somewhere over thousands of years of history have tried them and made them work? The fact that they're still just theories is, for him, pretty strong evidence that they're probably not great ideas. We should be learning from the collected wisdom of the past, not just tossing it all out for some brand new, unproven theory. So when he looks at these real-world states, he doesn't see perfection. He sees a messy mix of some good ideas and some really critical flaws. For example, both Sparta and Crete had these famous common meals, right? But he points out that Sparta's system was funded privately, which meant the poor couldn't even participate. Both had powerful political offices, but in Sparta, the officials were often poor themselves and super easy to bribe, while in Crete, the whole government was just prone to instability. It just goes to show that even the most admired states of his day were, far from perfect. And he really, really digs into the problems with Sparta. Everyone knew about their laws that created these super disciplined male warriors, but Aristotle points out the huge blind spot. They completely forgot to apply any of that discipline to the women. He says they became indulgent and, because of inheritance laws, ended up controlling a huge amount of the state's land and wealth. This massive concentration of property in the hands of just a few people led to a shocking drop in the number of available soldiers. So much so that the mighty Spartan state nearly collapsed after just one bad military loss. The state itself was poor, but its citizens were greedy. What a mess. Okay, so after all that criticism, after tearing down all these grand theories, you gotta ask, what's Aristotle's alternative? If perfect utopias are just a dangerous dream, what is a real lawmaker, a real politician, supposed to be aiming for? Well, his path is all about practical wisdom. He's basically telling us, first, learn from experience. Value what has actually worked in the past. Second, embrace plurality. That diversity in your state isn't a weakness, it's your greatest strength. Third, unify your citizens, but not by force or by abolishing their private lives. Unify them through a shared education, through philosophy, good customs, and wise laws that build character. And above all, you have to be moderate. You have to ground your laws in a realistic understanding of what people are actually like, not what you wish they were. And this right here is the core takeaway from all of this. For Aristotle, true political wisdom isn't about dreaming up impossible fantasies. It's about improving what you already have. A good leader doesn't burn everything down to start from scratch with some perfect blueprint. No, they start with the society they've got, with all its flaws and traditions, and they work slowly and carefully to make it better. It's a philosophy of improvement, not revolution.
In the end, Aristotle's lesson is a pretty sobering one. It's about the limits of what politics can even do. We can change our systems, we can move property around, we can reorganize society all we want.
But what we can't do is legislate away the basic flaws in human nature. He warns us that any political project that promises to create a perfect human being to eliminate wickedness itself isn't just unrealistic, it's incredibly dangerous.
It is such a powerful critique, and it's coming to us from more than 2,000 years ago. And it really leaves us with a huge question for our own time, doesn't it? As we try to make our world better, are we listening to Aristotle's realism? Or are we, even today, still in danger of chasing after impossible and maybe even destructive utopias?